Hey guys, welcome back to Reignited and our Identity Crisis build. That is my 1986 Chevy C10 that I've swapped a 392 Hemi into and twin turbocharged, hence why it's called Identity Crisis. If you haven't been following the build so far, here's a quick recap for you. Now in this episode, we're going to be taking care of a couple of major drivetrain swaps. Number one, we're going to be removing the factory 10-bolt rear end and replacing it with a Ford 8.8 rear end. And also we're going to be installing and finalizing the 8 HP transmission swap. All right, let's talk about some stuff for the 8 HP swap. That is the 8-speed Dodge transmission that I'm going to stick in this thing. Now, what I'm using to control it here is the Maxx ECU. Now, this is the race one, and the reason why I'm going with the Maxx ECU for this build is because this will control both the engine and the transmission together. So I really wanted them all talking to each other with no complications there. So that's why I went this route. We used a Maxx ECU on that Turbo Colorado build I did for my brother-in-law. Go ahead and check that out right here if you haven't seen that. I thought that was a really fun build.
Solid.
Yeah, that sounded good.
426.
Oh!
Hemi numbers.
Exactly right. You won't be able to just go ahead and bolt in 8 HP and then automatically run it with this. You need to have the correct software to run it with the Maxx ECU, and that requires re-flashing the TCM or the transmission control module, which on the 8 HP is bolted on top of the valve body. So it's this guy right here. That little controller right in there. That's your TCM. So that needs to be reprogrammed. Now you can rent a tool to reprogram it, kind of, maybe. It seemed kind of fishy there. So I ended up sending mine out to a company out in Las Vegas. I'll go ahead and put that in the link down below, which company I used, not sponsored, anything like that. He was really fast, no problem. It was actually pretty cheap overall. I think it was like $100 to get this thing reflashed. Not that bad at all. So now we need to get this TCM bolted back up to the valve body, get the valve body back into the transmission. Also, you'll notice here that I have a different torque converter. This is from a Scat Pack 1320 model, so it has a slightly higher stall speed than your standard 8-speed transmission would. This has a stall speed of 2350. Now, ideally, I'd probably want a stall speed above 3000, but those torque converters are like $1,400, so I just didn't really feel like spending that right now. Let's try this first and see how it performs, and then if I need to, I can make that switch later on. Also, you'll notice I have an actual shifter here. This is brand spanking new. This is from a, I don't know, like a 2017, 2018 Jeep Grand Cherokee, something like that. But I like this shifter mechanism. Pretty much any of these 8-speed Dodge transmissions or shifters will work because they have the same plug on them, the same CAN signals all the way through. But I just like the way these ones look. I definitely did not want to go to the rotary dial style like I have in my Ram 1500. I wanted an actual shifter here, which you can still put in manual mode and shift manually. One thing you'll notice about these is that they are fully electronic shifters. There is no shifter cable going from the shifter to the transmission. So this is all you need, which is the specialized harness that comes with the Maxx ECU that actually connects to the shifter assembly itself, the transmission, and to the Maxx ECU. So at this time, let's go ahead and get that TCM bolted back up to the valve body, get it back in the truck. Now, valve body is one of those things that you want to make absolutely sure that you're doing everything correctly, and that includes torquing the bolts to the proper values. In this case, I'll be using my inch-pound torque wrench that Lexivon sent out. Should make easy work of this. If you're wondering, the torque value for these particular bolts is 71 inch-pounds. We're gonna go ahead and get our new torque converter installed. Couple of things I wanna point out to you guys when it comes to a torque converter installation. One thing is that people seem to be very, very particular about filling the torque converter before they actually put the thing back on. It's something we've all heard, right? You need to fill that torque converter. It's not entirely necessary to fill that thing completely to the brim. The torque converter holds quite a bit more fluid than you think it does. And honestly, as long as there is some fluid in there when you start the vehicle, the torque converter will fill on its own just fine and be fully lubricated. I guarantee you, if you fill that thing to the top and then try to slap it in there, all you're gonna do is make a gigantic mess. So I would say at least a quart, maybe a quart and a half, and that's totally fine. Anything more than that and you're just looking to make a mess. Now, the second thing is a lot of people are concerned about making sure that the torque converter is fully seated before they actually try to reinstall the transmission. And that is an important deal. And sometimes you've heard of those 3 clunks you can feel, it goes clunk, clunk, clunk to have it fully seated. That is also true, but it's kind of a feel thing. And if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, it can be hard to understand whether you've achieved that or not. I would say the far easiest way to do this is if you're pulling a transmission that already has a torque converter in it, take note of where the flange of the torque converter is in relation to the bell housing. Actually measure that. That way, when you put the new one on, you can make sure it's back to the same depth inside the transmission. If you do that, you can be sure that the torque converter is fully seated. Now, on the other hand, if you're working on a transmission that does not have a torque converter already installed and you are just going to have to go by feel, and one of the easiest ways to do that is to just push it in there lightly, feel that first clunk, keep rotating while you're doing it, and a good key to it as well is to try to keep the torque converter as square as possible, because before it's fully seated, it's going to want to sit at an angle. It's going to rest like that. So you want to support the torque converter, make sure it's as flat as possible while spinning it at the same time. Some people like to try to set the transmission on end and put the torque converter straight down. I don't recommend doing that. You're putting too much force on the torque converter itself and it won't want to find its home very easily. You could spin that thing for 3 hours and it's not going to go clunk, clunk, clunk all the way down in like you think it would. I just recommend doing it right on its side like this. Support that torque converter to where it's nice and flat. Give light pressure on it while you're spinning it and you'll feel it go clunk, clunk, clunk all the way in and you'll know you're fully seated. Another thing to watch out for is that the torque converter does have quite a bit of weight to it. So if you have your transmission on a stand, make sure it's actually strapped down, because once you pull this torque converter off, it likes to tumble backwards off of the stand. So make sure you have it secured before you pull the torque converter off. Okay, just that simple. We've got our torque converter installed. Not really a big deal. So then how do you know if you have your torque converter fully installed here if you have no way to measure it beforehand? Well, a good rule of thumb here is that when you put the transmission back in the vehicle, after the bolts to the bell housing are tight, you should still be able to freely spin the torque converter inside the housing here. If you can't, it's binding and it's not seated all the way, don't force it the rest of the way. You should have at least 1/8 of an inch of clearance between the flex plate and the torque converter that you have to pull the torque converter forward to actually bolt it to the flex plate. If you don't have that clearance, it's not installed correctly. Now, like most European style transmissions, these 8HPs do not have a transmission dipstick. And as much of a pain in the butt as that can be, it's not too big of a deal. If you don't have any fluid on the ground, you don't have any reason to believe you're losing any trans fluid, best just not to even worry about it. The fill procedure for this is very simple. There's a plug right here on the side. Go ahead and pop that out. Fill it until you have fluid draining out of the case here with the engine not running. That gives you enough fluid inside the transmission to fire the thing up. And then you go ahead and fire the vehicle up, let it run at idle, go ahead and shift through the gears, drive, reverse a few different times. And then while the engine is still running, raise it up and fill it through this hole until the fluid drains out. Put the plug back in, you're done. It's a pretty simple procedure. All right, so we've clearly got a steady stream of fluid running out here. So now it's time to put that plug back in here. Perfect. Now we're not ready to obviously fire the engine yet, but as soon as I do fire the engine, then we'll raise this thing back up, pop that plug back out, and put the rest of the fluid in there. Now our next move here could feel like a step backwards because what we need to do is we need to get the engine back out of the engine bay here. We need to disassemble basically everything you see here. And the reason for that is we really need to finish up a lot of the fabrication here, just tidying things up, little stuff all here and there before we paint the engine bay, and then we can put everything back in for the final time. So although it feels like kind of a step backwards, it's actually a huge step forwards because after this time, this stuff's going in for good and it's not coming back out. So we are getting very, very close. All right, let's get this thing yanked out of here. All right, we've got basically everything taken care of here with the engine out that we need to. Got our firewall panel all welded up and seam sealed and painted, so that looks just fine. Basically, the goal was just to kind of get it to blend in, and that's basically as good as we're gonna get there. Obviously, body and paint, not really my thing. Also, we have fixed our issue here with our interference with our valve cover by switching to an 8-inch diameter booster here. So it's a little bit deeper. I guess it's a dual stage, I don't know, whatever it is. It should be a good replacement for the stock one, but we'll no longer have any interference with our valve cover, so that's an easy fix. I'm going to be installing a line lock solenoid on here as well, so I can do the burnouts, everything like that. So that's all set up. Went ahead and got the frame completely boxed up. You guys saw that already. Basically, everything's ready to go for the engine to get dropped back into this thing. I think I'm gonna do that right now just because I wanna do it, and I think it'll provide some good motivation here moving forward. One of the other things we need to do to prep this rear axle for installation here is a preventative measure, and that is that these Ford 8.8 axles, the axle tubes themselves are somewhat known to actually twist in the housing because they basically just have these little kind of plug welds that are actually holding them in place. So in order to prevent that, we want to go ahead and weld these tubes all the way around, which I have already done. Went ahead and just MIG welded these things. Now this is a process that I've already done on a different axle for another build that I did. And on that project, I attempted to TIG weld at first, but the reality is that this housing here is cast steel. And let me tell you, it is some of the worst cast steel I've ever seen in my life. I don't know if it's just because it's so oil impregnated at this point, but this stuff welds terribly. It spits, it pops, it comes apart, it contaminates. It's not great. So this time around, I didn't even attempt to TIG weld it. I just went ahead and hit it with the MIG, and it's a lot easier and more simple, and just zip, zip, good to go. Now we can move on. Real quick, a couple of the reasons why we're making this swap in the first place. Number one, we all know the reputation that the Ford 8.8 rear end has. This one's out of a 99 Ford Explorer. They're just very robust and they can handle quite a bit of power even in stock form. The factory 10 bolt in these things just isn't really known for having that much capability, even though I've been beating on this one pretty good and it's taken it so far. However, this one also has the drum brakes in the back, as you can see, and the Explorer 8.8 has the disc brakes, so a little bit of an upgrade there as well. Parts are extremely readily available for that Ford 8.8 to upgrade it into the future. So a couple of reasons why I'm making that swap. They actually have the same gear ratio in them, 373. I almost would have preferred if the 8.8 had the 355 ratio in there, or even a 323, something of that nature. We're gonna try it with the 373s and see just how well it works out. But the first thing we need to do here is go ahead and unbolt everything here and get this rear axle out of here. Okay, we got that 10 bolt out of there. The only thing I'm gonna do with this axle is we need to cut off these shock mounting tabs here on each side because I'm gonna swap them to the new axle because we are still using these aftermarket shocks in the stock shock location. We've got that new Ford 8.8 rear axle installed. I've got this thing centered side to side. Now what we need to do is we need to actually set up the pinion angle. So I need to actually set this thing down on its own weight so I can measure those angles. If I were to do that all the way to the ground, I'd never be able to fit into the vehicle. So I've got these jack stands set to where I can set this thing down and still slide underneath so I can measure the angles we need. As you can see, I just have this thing set up loosely right now. And the reason I have that is so that I can actually pivot this thing and actually change that pinion angle. Once I have that set, then I can go ahead and tack these saddles in place. And then I'll pull the whole thing back out and weld it all up after I've got the shock mounts tacked up in there as well. One side effect of the Ford 8.8 that is kind of a bummer is that it is about 4 inches narrower than the 10 bolt rear axle is. So in order to make my stock wheels fit, there's a different bolt pattern too. So in order to make the stock wheels fit, I have to run these 2-inch spacers, which are massive. But I'm okay with that for the street wheels and tires, but I think with the drag slicks, I'm gonna go ahead and pull these off and just get a wheel that has enough offset with the original bolt pattern there to work. Cause I don't really trust a 2-inch spacer with that kind of pressure under it. Rear axle is essentially placed in there. I've got the rear shock hangers tacked into place so I can final weld those, and also got the axle saddles tacked into place as well. So now I can take this thing back out, get those things fully welded up, and then we can reinstall the rear axle for good. She's all buzzed up, pretty happy with how this all turned out. Let's get this thing reinstalled and get this thing back sitting on its own 4 wheels again. And there we have it, Ford 8.8 swap into a 1986 Chevy C10. Really happy with how this came out. Feel like it's all really well secured. Got those shock mounts all welded in there. I think it looks good and it's going to be very consistent for this truck. Now, there's a few of you who may remember that I said I was going to do a 4-link setup in the back of this truck with this rear axle, and that was absolutely the plan. But once again, time has just absolutely gotten away from me. In order to get this thing done in time for the event at the end of September, this was the route I had to go. I think the Caltrax bars that I built for it several years ago, they've been working really well, so I don't think that's particularly going to be a problem moving forward. The 4-link was just something I wanted to do because it would be interesting as a fab job. That will still happen. But for right now, we're just gonna stick with the leaf springs for this particular event. Also, another major upgrade here. I'm going to be able to use the Ford Explorer factory rear sway bar. I just went ahead and built up some brackets here to go on either side of the frame for the end links to mount to. And yeah, now I have a sway bar for the rear end of the truck as well. So definitely a big upgrade with this axle. All right, we've got our rear suspension all finished up. Everything is finished mounted in here. I went ahead and got the brakes hooked back up here so we have functioning brakes again, got those bled. And also This is pretty cool. This is a little bracket that I designed that I could basically reuse the existing e-brake cables for the 8.8 rear end, and I mated them to the C10 e-brake cable. So nice little connection point there. I need to shoot that with a quick coat of paint, but it seems to be working really well. So happy I was able to get that working. But now everything is all set here with the rear end. Now we need to turn our attention to the drive shaft. And here we have our custom drive shaft for the C10 truck. Now this is one of the biggest expenses on the entire project, simply because I can't do this sort of thing myself. I have to go to a driveline shop, and making something like this is a little bit difficult because there's a specific flange that needs to be on the one end here that goes to the back of the 8-speed transmission. It has to be an internal slip yoke style, can't be external, because both flanges are rigid mounted on both the transmission and on the differential side. So basically, it's a lot of money for something like this. And this is an upgraded version here where this is 1/8 inch thick aluminum, so it should be a little bit stronger than what a stock drive shaft should be. Astonishingly, this is the exact length of a factory 2-wheel drive Ram 1500 with the 8-speed transmission in it. It just so happened to actually work for my application, so I was very excited about that. Didn't have to make a custom length one. Pretty much the only thing I have to do at this point is swap the rear flange here, because this is designed to go onto a Ram 1500 rear end, whereas we have the Ford 8.8. My original plan here is, because I had the Ford 8.8 flange already, I would just do basically a conversion U-joint between the factory size U-joints to the 1350 size that this driveline comes with. Well, I apparently misordered here and I got the wrong size U-joint, but you know what? That was an opportunity to basically upgrade anyway, because I was like, why am I using this factory flange that has smaller U-joint yokes anyway? Why not just get a proper Ford 8.8 flange that has the 1350 yokes right off the bat? So that's what I got here. This really was not that expensive. Obviously the Ford 8.8 is a very popular rear end platform, so that sort of stuff is available. So let's go ahead and get this yoke swapped on, and then we can get this driveline installed in the truck for good. All right, just that easy. She works good. Let's get it installed. Man, that is absolutely awesome. Just loving that. Really nice to have a proper rear drive shaft in this thing. But now that leads us to another thing here, is that when you're running the kind of horsepower I'll be running and the kind of speeds I'll be running, one of the safety things you need to do is install a drive shaft safety loop. So let's look at that now. This was something that I thought wouldn't be all that exciting for you guys to watch me build, so I just went ahead and knocked it out. And as you can see, it's a 2-piece design. It goes just like that. Forms a nice little loop here for the drive shaft to run down through and really protect it in case one of those U-joints fails. The drive shaft won't drop down and pogo the whole truck, or it won't drop down and damage the track itself. So nice little safety measure here. Went ahead and made sure I had plenty of clearance for both up and down throughout the full suspension stroke. So let's get this thing installed. I'll show you guys what it looks like. I have to say, I'm really happy with how this came out. I think that's really going to be some nice protection here. And again, it is kind of one of those mandated safety things anyway. So I'm glad I went ahead and got that all knocked out. Really happy with all the clearance and everything. Should work well. Hopefully I'll never actually have to use it, but if I do, at least I have it. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you guys in this episode is that I mentioned before when I installed that axle that in order to fit those street tires, we needed to run those 2-inch wheel spacers. Definitely not comfortable with that when you're running the actual slicks for the vehicle. It's fine with the street tire that you're just running around on the track. I don't want that. I want it to be direct, bolted straight to the hub itself. So I had to get a set of different wheels for it. These are some Krager Steelies. These are 10 inches wide. They're going to work out really good on these existing slicks that I had. I think these are 26.5 by 10 slicks, I think. I don't know, I could probably look at it right now. 26 by 10, right? So that's what we're going with on this truck. These bolt directly to the Ford 8.8 rear end and puts the tire exactly where it was previously, because these have a much lower backspace to them than the old wheels did. Let's get them on the truck. I want to get this thing rolled out, give you guys a closer look at the whole truck all together. Now, did I have to tow the truck outside my shop to get this final shot for you? Yes, I did. But this is going to be the last time for that, because in our next episode, you're going to see me do all of the custom wiring harness for this thing. We have a full standalone ECU that we're going to use to actually program this thing that'll run both the engine and the transmission on there. I'm very excited about it, but it is our final step before we actually fire this thing up and take it for our first drive. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that next episode. For the time being, take in the truck, tell me what you guys think of it so far. We'll see you guys next time on Reignited.